Greetings, brothers and sisters. There's free agent Chris Cuomo. The free agent is there. I want to do a whole big thing on Liz Cheney at the end and her speech. And Alec Baldwin gave me a gift in terms of he endorsed Liz Cheney in a way. I'll get into his Instagram in a moment. So when I make videos, I often miss things, or like I said, I could have went a little harder on that, or I could have went a little bit further on that, and I just have learned to let it go, right? If I don't catch it when I'm editing and add it when I'm editing, I usually don't go revisit something unless it's just so flagrant. But like I said yesterday, I was coming back from the dentist and I just didn't give this enough attention. So this moment where Chris Cuomo is asking Alec Baldwin, and again, the miracle of this, I mean, this was a gift from Cuomo's, but when he's talking about Alec Baldwin's issue here.
Of that, I see a lot of it in your situation. The people who have been trying to destroy you for the last year, for the horrible events that happened at Rust.
See, he is prefacing the question. The question is, you lied about pulling the trigger, right? We know that he lied about pulling the trigger. That's, he pulled the trigger. He could have had the trigger already pulled and then pulled the hammer back. He could have done that, right? But either way, he lied about it. He lied about it in an interview, and now we know for sure he lied. But we kind of knew already because so many experts, firearm experts, said that what he was claiming to do couldn't happen. I mean, there was just so many YouTube videos filled with experts saying, yeah, that's a lie. But now the FBI, it makes it, a lie to everyone else, right, who isn't a truther or an alternative media person. And so Chris Cuomo has got to ask his friend about this lie. And so first he prefaces it as how all these people are trying to destroy you. You're the victim here. You shot somebody and people are trying to use that to destroy you. You're such a victim, right? That's the first part.
It's as much about just taking you down once and for all as it is what happened on set, no?
The reality for me and all I can really...
And so that's how he prefaced the first part. So then he goes into says this.
I go back and forth about how helpful fact analysis is for people in any...
So he's pointing to his brain because he's thinking hard here. All the steroids he's taking. But now he's, instead of just asking the question...
kind of judgment situation outside of a courtroom, obviously, where you only know what you can show. There's a standard. There's due process means something there. In larger society, I don't know what it means. It's all so inherently subjective. I have one question that if you...
ask the question. Just ask it. But look at how much, he's supposed to be a journalist and a free agent. And look at how much he wobbles on this question and how many outs and excuses he builds into the question to enable his friend Alec Baldwin to escape the answering the question.
If you don't feel that you can clear it up now, you should at some point in the future.
If you don't think you can clear it up now, which you should, because that's why everyone's watching this. The only reason to tune into this thing, well, of course you could mock the whole interview because it's two, douches going, it's mockable, right? But in terms of the reason that most people care about this is Alec Baldwin is just being called out as a liar by the FBI, right? The liberal-leaning, Democratic-leaning FBI has just said Alec Baldwin, a Trump hater, got caught lying about pulling the trigger in a significant lie.
Sure. But then I want to talk to you about just processing and coping and enduring through this situation.
So again, ask the question. Don't talk about that like it's more important. Nobody cares about that. He's supposed to be a journalist, and he's got a guy who shot a coworker and now has been caught lying. He lied to another member of the media, George Stephanopoulos.
The fact question is, in an earlier interview, you said, I didn't pull the trigger. And there's all...
Okay, so that's the question. But now he gives another excuse.
All this stage direction about the hammer, which is obviously a part of a revolver that people can look up for themselves, but that you pulled it back as the scene was directed for you to do. You say you never pulled the trigger, but the gun went off.
Right.
You do the ABC interview, and it was kind of left there.
It wasn't left there. Like, he said it multiple times. George Stephanopoulos, he said it throughout the interview. Alec Baldwin said he didn't pull the trigger, right?
That will not make sense to people. If a bullet comes out of a gun, they say, well, then someone fired
You're
it. It was
familiar
in your
with,
hand.
but this did not come from me. This came from the DA's office themselves. You're familiar with what fanning a gun is. Have you heard of that phrase, fanning a gun?
Yes, but explain
So
it.
if you pull the
Explain it. Like, explain that. So this answer is they fan a gun, but the only way the fanning works is if you're holding the trigger down. And so, like, he's not explaining it, right? Even though his dad won awards on marksmanship in the Marines, and he gave his kids, his brother posted this on Instagram. They all know, this was before this happened. They all grew up with firearms. They all grew up shooting. They all grew up with an expert firearm teacher, their dad. And he gave a glowing review of those times together and how much they all enjoyed it. And Alec Baldwin has used guns in so many different movies. He had a low-budget movie where he hired, cheap staff that he produced, and he shot a cinematographer and then lied about pulling the trigger. It's physically impossible, the FBI has determined, for what he said happened to happen.
hammer back and you don't lock the hammer. If you pull the hammer back pretty far, in old Western movies, you'd see someone fan the hammer of the gun. The hammer didn't lock. You pulled it back to an extent where it would fire the bullet without you pulling the trigger, without you locking the hammer. The man who's the...
Okay, but that is only if you have the trigger depressed, and that's what the FBI said. They're not saying that you did that because they're not saying that's possible. That you could pull the hammer far enough back to fire so it create enough friction, enough force to make the bullet fire, and yet wouldn't lock. They're saying that's impossible. That the only way it would lock is if you pulled the hammer all the way back. I mean, the only way the bullet would fire is if you pulled the hammer all the way back. And the way to do that would be to press the trigger ahead of time so the hammer never locked. So that's what he's referring to in terms of fanning. This is from Wikipedia. Fanning is a revolver shooting technique in which the shooter uses one hand to hold the gun and pull the trigger and pull the M&F and trigger, Alec, while using the other hand to cock back the hammer repeatedly in a slapping-like fashion without touching any other parts of the gun. Now, Alec didn't say anything about fanning in the interview. Remember this promo?
I mean, even now, I find it hard to believe that. It just doesn't seem real to me.
Alec Baldwin.
You haven't said much in public since that tragic accident. Why speak out now? I think the big question, and the one you must have asked yourself 1,000 times, how could this have happened? It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. No.
So if he's saying he was fanning, he would have to pull the trigger. Like, the only way it went off is he pulled the trigger. So that's a lie, right? Like, he was saying that she was giving him direction. He pulled the hammer back. He let the hammer go, and the bullet fired.
Never.
Let me find that longer clip here.
We kept doing this, and so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. And I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun, and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun, and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun goes off.
At the moment, the decisive
That was the
moment
moment the gun went off, yeah. That was the moment the gun went off.
So that's a lie. You've got caught lying. That's impossible. It's physically impossible. All these firearm experts are saying this is impossible. Now the FBI has said it's impossible. Wikipedia says your story now, your news story about fanning, again, is complete BS because fanning involves pulling the trigger with one hand and then pulling the hammer back all the way with the other. You have to pull the hammer all the way back for the gun to fire, for the bullet to fire. And so you're getting caught in a lie here, right?
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never. Never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at somebody and pull the trigger. On day one.
But you did do that. So now we know you did do that, right? You 100% did do that. So we now know that he's lied again now to Chris Cuomo. So Chris Cuomo's, you are getting played by your friend here.
Principal safety officer on the set of the film declared that the gun was safe when he handed it to me. The person who was the principal safety officer of the film declared in front of the entire assemblage, this is a cold gun. Now, why did he say that? If he didn't know, if he hadn't checked. The point is, all of us were told that everything was cool and you can relax and we're working with a gun that's safe to rehearse with. But he explained it to me effectively, that that's exactly what can happen if you pull a hammer back and let it go. If there's a live round. See, there's only one question to ask here. Who put a live round in the gun?
And so look at him shake his head. Look at him shake his head. Now, that isn't your job as a so-called journalist, free agent man. He's supposed to be a free agent. He talks about how he's not a Democrat or Republican. He's a free agent, willing to ask the tough questions other people won't ask. But the question is that Alec Baldwin just lied to you. You should have enough knowledge going into it and saying to him, yeah, but when you fan a gun, Alec, you have to hold down the trigger. You're talking about something where you're either holding down the trigger, you're pulling the trigger ahead of time, and then so the hammer doesn't lock, or you are pulling it afterwards. Those are your two choices. You pulled the M&F trigger M&F'er, and you lied about it. Now you've lied about this thing fanning, and then you're switching the story and trying to, think about how the nepotism here, he's switching the story to say, well, it's really about who brought a live round on. That's important, but it's also important that you lied, that you said you would never pull a trigger when you were pointing a gun at somebody. Your finger shouldn't have even been on the trigger. And so if you were pulling the hammer back, it would have either cocked or it wouldn't have fired the bullet, right? And so those are your two options. And the trigger had to be pulled. And Chris Cuomo should ask this question here.
That's it. There is no other question to ask.
Do you have any suspicion?
So now he goes into, is there a conspiracy, right? These guys who are anti-conspiracy theories and have hammered Trump and the Republicans for being conspiracy theorists, he goes,
that this could have been a setup?
No.
And so he gets into it. He's giving him an out here. Asks a follow-up question and say, Alec, you didn't answer the question. He already gave him an out. Said, you might want to address this now, or you might want to address this later with somebody else, but sometime you should address this, right? This is, that's not journalism. You're not being a free agent. This is your friend. The same thing you got fired for was doing nepotism with your brother and letting your brother come on and shill his immoral policies, his immoral handling of the debacle of the COVID in his city, the second biggest city in America, and they had the most deaths and, all the cover-up and all the, having sick people go and stay with the most vulnerable population in nursing homes. And you gave your brother the same kind of treatment you're giving Alec because he was your brother and Alec's your friend. And so you're letting him get a pass here. This isn't a hard-hitting interview. You're not being a journalist. You're not a free agent, right? Like you should make him answer the question. All right, Alec, that's all good and fine. Yeah, the live round's a big deal. You lied. You had to pull the trigger. The FBI says you have to pull the trigger. Are you saying that you didn't pull the trigger? Are you still saying that? Are you saying that you never pulled the trigger? Because you said you would never point a gun at somebody and pull a trigger because you were trained not to do that. That's my training is what you said. And that's what most people are trained to do. Never point a gun and pull a trigger. Always assume it's loaded. If you work with any safety person to do with firearms, they say always assume the gun is loaded. Always assume the gun's loaded, right? And so that's just what has to happen. Years ago, I was in college and I had a roommate who was a rent-a-cop. Like he used to sell pot before I moved in, but then he became like a auxiliary policeman, where he would do, direct traffic and other things. Like he didn't go through the training of a policeman. Like he could only do certain things, and so he was like a very seedy guy. And he got a police revolver. And one of my other friends, we went to go talk to him. I went to ask my roommate something, right? And on his dresser, he had a handgun. And my other friend went in the room before me. He was a guy who played on my intramural basketball team, right? And they didn't even know the guy that well. And he picks up the gun, this, police revolver, and points it at my roommate and pulls the trigger. Like, just unthinking, right? And like, I was, this was my first lesson into, how dangerous it is to have a gun around, right? This is often happens to people where something stupid like that happens. And then I like, what are you doing, right? And even my roommate, who knew it wasn't loaded, was freaked out, right? And my friend was like, I don't know why I did that. He was like kind of rattled. Like, why would he just do that? Like, he just picked it up, pointed at him, and pulled the trigger. It was like one of these revolver too, type of, cult revolver type of guns, right? And just, without any knowledge of it at all. And so those things happen. And Alec Baldwin had sufficient training as a young man, as a kid, from his dad, and he worked in so many movies. And he said he would never do this behavior, which he now is confirmed he did. And he lied about it. Now he's lying to Chris Cuomo's about it, right? And Chris Cuomo's weakness as a journalist and not asking the questions and making him answer the question. You are now caught as a liar. Are you reversing your story? What are you saying? And he says this goofy thing about fanning, and then he deflects, and he moves over to this idea that somebody put a live round on the set. That's the only thing that matters. No, you got caught lying, MNFer. The only thing that matters to the media and most people is you getting caught lying and your wife getting caught lying, faking an accent, and then all these other things, right? But anyways, this is Chris Cuomo doubling down after doing the same thing, getting fired for CNN for doing the same thing with his brother, now doing it with his friend Alec Baldwin and calling himself a journalist. So then Alec Baldwin posted a picture of Liz Cheney, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a rare gift.
Hey, I'm in my car, and I wanted to leave a quickie here to congratulate Liz Cheney. I never thought I would say that, and I'm sure that Liz Cheney couldn't care less about me congratulating her.
So I'm glad to see you're doing this Instagram video while driving your car, because you have such a record of being a safe person, a cautious person. What could happen? Like, how could you possibly make things worse by driving your car and talking to strangers about a Republican candidate that in every way, shape, or form is not a hero?
I'm very proud of Liz Cheney today because of the circumstances under which she is likely to lose the primary in Wyoming for her congressional seat.
So you're proud of Liz Cheney for being a loser, and I'm sure she'll reciprocate. You guys can both celebrate your loserness.
This thought on my part was prompted by the movie Navalny. The Hamptons Film Festival screened the film Navalny this summer. We had Daniel Rohrer, the director. We had Alexei Navalny, the Russian political figure and dissident and nemesis of Vladimir Putin. I want to apologize. I'm sorry that Vladimir Putin has effed with me again.
See, this is the part of the, he talks briefly about Liz Cheney. So there's an introduction to Alec Baldwin's videos. He could be grieving an actor or actress, or he could be talking about a politician, whatever it might be. And that lasts about a minute, where he talks about the other person. And then he talks about the other person in relation to him and his life and his stories and, his name dropping, right? Which is referred to as narcissism, Alec.
His wife and 2 children there. We had Maria Pivchik. I think I'm mispronouncing her name. But Maria, one of the journalists who worked with Navalny to document his activities, returning to Russia after being nearly killed and poisoned by the Russian government, purportedly. And Christo Grotsev,
Okay, so by now you've forgotten that this like little Alec pieces about one Liz Cheney, right? Like he always does this. He goes into his own stuff, and he's always talking about this Navalny guy when he talks about Putin or Trump.
Bellingcat journalist who's a subject in the film as well. He couldn't make it, but we wanted him to come. On my podcast, here'sthething.com.
Exactly. Here'sthething.com. Do you get that? Alec was plugging his podcast. He started talking about Liz Cheney and how she's a hero. Then he got into Navalny and the play and the thing and the that. And now it's his podcast. Somehow it's worked its way back around for Alec to plug himself. And Alec is the best at plugging himself.
You can go to here'sthething.org, I believe it is, to get my podcast with Daniel Rohrer, who directed the film. It's called Navalny. And Christo Grotsev came to the studio, and I interviewed him as well. The film was produced by CNN and distributed, I believe, by HBO. Navalny is the documentary. We screened it this summer. It's a great film. And when the film was over, the screening we had, I'd seen it before, and I watched it again at the screening. When we screened the film, went to dinner afterward, and we talked about who is the American Navalny.
Oh, that's got to be Liz Cheney. If there was ever a Navalny, it's Liz J. Cheney.
And although I'm sure that Liz Cheney would bristle at this comparison, in no other way, perhaps, obviously, no way politically, Liz Cheney reminds me of Navalny. Because in the film, and then later on we put a finer point on this on the podcast, we talked about how Navalny says that he can't direct his supporters from a hotel in Paris.
You know, I thought you driving and doing this was going to be distracting, and the road noise was going to make it hard to hear you, and the speed bump you just went over. I thought all that was going to suck, but it just makes it better, Alec. I mean, like, you know, I know you're such a busy guy. You need to take advantage of every second you have, and you're talking about Liz Cheney and Navalny. You don't have time to just sit down somewhere and do a proper video. You know, I talked about how Alec always uses, there's different ways to post videos on Instagram. And I don't know how you do it because I don't post stuff on Instagram. But Alec was one of my favorite because he would post these videos where I could make the thing go full screen. You know, he doesn't make the thing tall, right? He doesn't have it go up and down, right? And make it, you know, do tall videos. He does widescreen videos, which I really appreciate, right? And I can make the volume match the volume of my voiceover. And ever since I said that, Alec's been screwing me over, much like Putin is screwing him over. And so, you know, I wish he would go back. Alec, go back to the old format. It just isn't cool. You're not, you know, these are subpar videos. Park your car. Don't add a hit and run to you're already shooting a coworker. A hit and run that you capture on film, right? Don't add that to your already potential criminal list. Just sit down somewhere, shoot your 7-8 minute video, do a proper video, and it'll just be better for everyone.
He can't be living outside of Russia and encouraging people to carry on this fight of his. That wouldn't be acceptable to him. He had to be in Russia and shoulder to shoulder, if you will, with his comrades. And so he knew he was going to be arrested, or there would be some very strong likelihood of that. And so he goes back to Russia and is arrested and sentenced to, 7 or 8 years in prison, I believe. But in his mind, he did what he had to do. Liz Cheney did what she had to do. She knew that morally she had to risk it all. She had to risk it all in terms of her political career as a Republican.
See, here's the thing about this. What about Kyrie Irving? Kyrie Irving risked it all. Kyrie Irving lost $17 million in salary. He risked his career. I mean, there was, those things. And maybe he'll lose a total of $50 million in terms of his next contract. And he did that for something he believed, right? And he's been hammered and he's been ostracized. I mean, he's, taken a beating for doing something he believed in a completely more organic and real way than Liz Cheney. So I'm going to go through Liz Cheney's speech. I'm going to hammer her father. I mean, I already know this is coming because I'm editing this right now, so I know what's happening. Liz Cheney's speech is brutal. I mean, this is a kind of epic video in this way. But Liz Cheney didn't stand for anything. Her father, and he even mentions her father here in a little bit, and how they're politically different. But her father was much worse than Trump. The things that he's done, and Jojo Magoo has done, I mean, Trump has his issues, the way he handled his supporters, his bailing on people, his not having like a spine, his, just always being about himself and all these things. But what he did as president, like the evil that he did, and he did some evil, right? Don't get me wrong. But the evil he did is nothing compared to what Obama did and what both Bushes did and what Cheney did and, all these people. I mean, there's just no comparison. But there's no heroes, and that's the problem here. In this left-right paradigm, the heroes are on your side, right? Like he thinks Hillary Clinton's a hero or Jojo Magoo's a hero. They're the good guys, and Trump is a bad guy. And then Liz Cheney's against Trump, so she's now a good guy, but when it was Dick Cheney, he was the bad guy because he's a Democrat. He's against Dick Cheney. This binary way of thinking. They're all bad guys. They're just, it's just the level of how much evil they're doing, right? And the system needs bad guys, right? This system, if you put good people in charge of it, it would collapse because it's a scam. It's a debt-based scam. It's propped up by military intervention and the military-industrial complex and all these other evil things that have to be done to keep the country going. That's why I hammer these, politicians and people, but I know that all of us are benefiting from what they're doing. I mean, benefiting on a material way. They're keeping the system going, which is tilting it in favor. The economic privileges are tilted in America's favor by evil things that are done by our politicians and the corporations. And that's not going to be the case for long. They're taking their hand off the scale, right? And so, but it's evil that they have to do. And like we all want to believe we're in a good country and we're good people, but we're eating other people's food and our system's oppressing other people. And that's just that simple, right? And there's no heroes here. Like we don't get to walk around and pat ourselves on the back and say how great we are, even though we do it all the time. Like it's an American pastime. But he's locked into this binary thought that Trump is the worst person in the world, right? The Democrats and the Republicans were always bad about this, how much they hate Hillary and all these people, right? But, both sides, it's a system that's evil, and you need evil people to run it.
To tell the truth about Trump and January 6th and so forth. And if that meant falling on her sword politically, at least as far as elected politics in Wyoming is concerned, then she would do that. She rolled up this window, I guess. Then she would do that. And she did. Today is the primary in Wyoming, and it looks like she's going to get defeated pretty handily. But she emerges from that event today as a hero, as a great hero politically.
Whatever reason Liz Cheney, whatever reason Liz Cheney took a stand against Trump isn't because she has integrity. We already know that. Her dad is the worst person. I'm going to really lay into him later on, right? And her whole family. And the whole Republican Party and the whole neocon thing that happened. I mean, they were, amongst the most evil. And so it isn't because of integrity. Whatever reason she had, of course, she knew it was going to cost her politically, but there was a reason. She was told by her handlers, I don't know what happened. But she, isn't doing it because of that she's a good person or a hero.
Great hero. She's a great hero. Her father is somebody, my politics were the opposite of her father. Her father represented everything I couldn't stand about Republican politics. But that doesn't matter today. What matters today is when I said at this dinner a couple weeks ago.
It totally matters because, Dick Cheney, by every measurable standard, is worse than Trump. I'm not a Trump fan. I'm not defending Trump. I'm not saying Trump's a hero, but Dick Cheney is far worse than Trump, and I'll get into that in just a bit here.
Where is the American Navalny? And by that I meant where was the person who would risk it all for their principles? I mean, how many people, Democrat or Republican, would even do that?
None, because none of them have principles. They do not have principles. They don't have morals. They don't have ethics. These are Washington, D.C. politicians. Local mayors, sure. State representatives, sure. State senators, even some governors, but not national politicians. They're bought and sold, and they've been corrupted.
Most of these people who walk the halls of Congress, the Senate, or the House are people who, there's a level of influence and power and so forth that they would never have otherwise. Elective politics was their only means. It was their only means of accomplishing this. And of becoming who they wanted to become. And
see, I don't know anything about this Navalny character, but the only reason Alec likes him is because he's not Putin. He opposes Putin, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so he doesn't like Putin. Putin's a bad guy. Trump's a bad guy. He likes Navalny and he likes Liz Cheney because they're standing up to Trump and Putin. But they both lost, right? And not that Trump has any real power. I mean, he certainly has power, but not national power, not media power, not the kind of power that's against Trump and really against us, like Trump's just their puppet. Trump is an asset for the powerful people who run the establishment. But this idea that, Navalny is now living in France and Liz Cheney is unemployed, right? And so what it means is if they did actually have principles, when you stand up for your principles, you end up getting booted from your country and your, political party, right? Spit it out, Alec.
There are next to none in that world that would do what Cheney has done to risk her entire political equity for this, to stand up for that principle, is something that is just so rare.
How do people listen to this drivel? I mean, as fans, there's plenty of people who watch his stuff, right?
So rare. So my congratulations to Liz Cheney. And I'm sorry that you're going to lose her position as a result of this, to lose it this way, because she was so courageous. You find little of that courage in the Democratic Party and none of it in the Republican Party, none. All this fealty to Trump is so dangerous for the country. But congratulations to Liz Cheney today. It's very brave what you've done. Very brave, very commendable. And you're a great American for doing that. Thank you.
Liz Cheney is a bipartisan hero from Alec. Liz Cheney is a star. Integrity matters. It's true. It makes me sick that she's losing when she is literally the only member of the GOP who stood up for the right thing. The only one. Yes, she is. Thank you. Thank you very much for this, Alec. Okay. So let's get into Liz Cheney and her dad. Chris Matthews says Dick Cheney got $34 million payday from Halliburton. Halliburton gave Dick Cheney a $34 million payout when he left the company to join the presidential ticket, but even made more off of the Iraq war. because he still owns stock, right? He owned a ton of stock in the company. And so when Dick Cheney manipulated illegal wars in Iraq, which had nothing to do with the big event, right? When he got people to go out like Colin Powell and sell this idea of weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be not true. I mean, those of us who saw it in real time and knew about it, and nobody was willing to stand up to him. The Democrats weren't willing to stand up to him and this movement, the media, all these people. They wanted some payback, and Iraq was it. 1 million innocent people dead in Iraq, kids getting droned, just so many horrible things that came out of this war. How much money did Halliburton make off the Iraq war? $39.5 billion, right? Dick Cheney had stock, lots of stock when he left, and now he's worth $150 million or more. And almost all of that came from Halliburton and these wars that he promoted. People hated him. He's the worst kind of politician and warmonger, a manipulative, heartless, frickin' supervillain that looks like a creep and has no discernible, likable characteristics and qualities, right? A guy who controlled the president. I mean, if you've seen the movie, and that doesn't even do justice to it, how he manipulated this fool, and he handled him, and he created all these illegal wars in Afghanistan, and many of us believe that he created the catalyst for this war and all this stuff with these neocons, and they walked away with lots of more money in terms of embezzlement and things like this. That isn't calculated. Like trillions of dollars went missing from the Defense Department, Donald Rumsfeld. These guys were involved in the first Iraq war, and they made a killing off of that war. And so this guy got unbelievably wealthy and manipulated evil acts, right? And there's lots of politicians I don't like. I mean, I don't like politicians in general because they're disingenuous, they're liars, they're the worst of the worst, right? But Dick Cheney is by far the most evil politician that we've ever had. And his daughter Liz, when you see her give her speech, she is just like him. She's heartless, no emotion, like that sneer he had. I mean, there's nothing godly coming from this person. Like someone who's like almost like soulless, right? Just this evil MNF-er, far worse than Trump. And all these liberals who love Joe Biden just droned 8 kids in Afghanistan on his way out. Remember? The Pentagon admits to killing 10 civilians, including 7 children in Kabul in the drone strike last month. And so this is Biden's act. And Obama droned a ton of kids, and George W. Bush droned kids, and kids were killed in these wars. 1 million Iraqis were killed in these illegal wars, which we know all these wars were failures, and Joe Biden pushed for all of them. But on his way out, he was taking a beating for the mishandling of the exit from Afghanistan. And I don't blame him for that, because whoever left Afghanistan was leaving a mess behind. And so that wasn't Biden's fault. But his, thing that he made up, this new group, remember, as a way to distract people away from the debacle. And he was saying, we're now going to fight wars through drones. And he was pushing for drone activity. And they created all these, events. And he ended up droning 7 children. And all these liberals and Democrats who say Trump is so bad, how many kids did Trump drone? Like how many wars did Trump create, right? Trump might be, an a-hole and a flim-flam man. I didn't vote for Trump, but there's no way he's worse than this guy, right? And to say Liz Cheney's a hero when her dad, she made her money, and the only reason that she's a politician is because of her dad. So let's go through this with Liz Cheney. Then I'm going to show you her ridiculous, where she's losing her concession speech. Liz Cheney thinking about White House run after primary loss. Cheney withering on way out, whatever it takes to stop Trump. Should be ashamed of herself. Trump gloats over nemesis Liz Cheney lost, calls her a fool. So Liz Cheney got hammered. The other woman won 66.3%. Liz Cheney got 28%. So she got doubled up on. She got double-digited, right? She got frickin' rolled. Wasn't even close, right? She has the big Cheney name. Cheney is a big, powerful politician there. But Trump got 70% of the vote in Wyoming. more than any other more than any other state. They love Trump, and she went against him, and they let her know it, right? I mean, it wasn't even close. Like, this wasn't, she had no chance of winning, right? Like, when you get lapped in politics, you just got completely rolled.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see.
Like, why does she have hay back here, right? Like, come on. Like, this George W. Bush owned a ranch, and he grew up in Connecticut and an elitist family with his grandfather, Prescott Bush, right? And he's somehow a Christian farmer in Texas with a Texas accent.
So many friends, family, especially wonderful to be here on the beautiful Meade Ranch. And thank you so much, Brad and Kate, for that wonderful introduction. We really are in God's country, and it's wonderful to welcome.
Like, why are you talking about God when there's no love or heart energy, no charisma? Like, this person is like a dial tone, so drab, so, no life, no zest, no insight, just a political drone whose father was a famous politician in a state where his name means a lot until now. Right? Like, she has nothing going on for her. There's nothing that is going to appeal to people other than Trump haters for what she's done. This single act, liberal Trump haters like her for one act. She has no, I mean, like, who would even hire this person? Like, she work in like the motor vehicle department or something, or right?
Welcome so many here. I want to say, first of all, a special thanks to every member of Team Cheney who is here in the audience.
Woo! The losers, woo!
And to tell you, our work is far from over.
It's over, Liz. You're done. There's no future for you in any sphere in politics or anywhere else.
Among the many, many blessings that we have as Americans and as individuals and as human beings, the blessing of family is surely the most important. And so,
yeah, too bad your dad was responsible for destroying so many families, killing so many kids, that warmonger of a father, right?
I want to thank all of my family and pay a special tribute to those who are here with us tonight. My mom and dad, Dick and Liz Cheney.
Your heartless dad who killed so many families, and the woman that supported him. Woo!
And my husband, Phil.
Henpecked. Woo! Henpecked, woo!
And 4 of our 5 kids are here. Katie and Gracie and Philip and Richard are all here tonight.
Woo!
And Elizabeth is starting law school today, so we'll have another generation carrying on dedication to the Constitution and to our freedom.
Okay, that's another Cheney.
A little over a year ago, I received a note from a Gold Star father. He said to me, "Standing up for truth honors all who gave all."
My God, your father was the most deceptive. I mean, everything that he did, he sold out people, ruined Colin Powell's career. I mean, people in the administration threw people under the bus just to weaselly stabbing anybody in the back. The way that he worked George W. Bush and made a complete joke of his presidency. All of it, right? All the evil that Cheney has done. And she's going to talk about truth, all the soldiers that suffered from these illegal wars, all of it. Like, just the hypocrisy, all of the lies.
And I have thought of his words every single day since then. I've thought of them because they are a reminder of how we must all conduct ourselves. We must conduct ourselves in a way that is worthy of the men and women who wear the uniform of this nation, and in particular of those who have given the ultimate sacrifice.
My God, like, just the filth that's coming out of her mouth. Why don't you your dad give back his Halliburton money?
They are the foundational principle of our Constitution. 2 years ago, I won this primary with 73% of the vote.
Wow, huh? And now you got, 28? What happened, Liz? Liz, what happened?
I could easily have done the same again. The path was clear. But it would have required that I go along with President Trump's lie about the 2020 election. It would have required that I enable.
So what they're saying, Alec Baldwin, all these Democratic shills, that she had integrity because she didn't go along with Trump's lies. But she just went along with Biden's lies when he droned kids. She went along with her dad's lies. Her dad lied about so many things that had disastrous effects on America and abroad. And I mean, people's lives, children, people's homes destroyed. I mean, all the profiteering from war. Like, she has no integrity. Like they're saying she made a tough choice. Whatever reason she made this choice, it isn't because she has a problem with lying. It isn't because she has integrity, right?
His ongoing efforts to unravel our democratic system and attack the foundations of our republic. That was a path I could not and would not take.
Woo! Woo! And so she's saying that her supporters, she lost half of her support from the last primary. And so those supporters are stupid and they're all going along with Trump and his lies. And I mean, she's crapping all over the people in her state, right? Like she knew it'd be easier to win her supporters and keep her supporters by backing Trump. But her dad had already criticized him. All these neocons, I saw Bill Kristol on one of these shows talking about how great she was and how great her father was. All these neocons, these evil neocons, right? Woo!
No House seat, no office in this land is more important than the principles that we are all sworn to protect. And I well understood the potential political consequences of abiding by my duty. Our republic...
Like she's trying to, don't make yourself sound good. Like you have no principles, your family has no principles.
...relies upon the goodwill of all candidates for office to accept honorably the outcome of elections. And tonight, Harriet Hageman has received the most votes in this primary. She won. I called her to concede the race. This primary election is...
Wow, you're so great, Liz. Liz, what an amazing thing. You got doubled up on, and everyone knew you were going to lose, but you made sure that you would call and concede, because that's just the kind of wonderful person, the wonderful family you came from, the Cheneys.
Over. But now the real work begins.
Woo! Woo! Woo, 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 woo. Look, that's a smile from Liz. Look at that beaming smile. She just lights up the whole pasture with her radiance and her effervescent personality.
The great and original champion of our party, Abraham Lincoln, was defeated in
Oh my God.
elections for the Senate and the House before he won the most important election of all. Lincoln ultimately prevailed. He saved our union.
You know what? She's such an Abraham Lincoln.
And he defined our obligation as Americans for all of history. Speaking at Gettysburg of the great task remaining before us, Lincoln said that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people...
And Lincoln, the war wasn't for slavery. It was an economic war. The North was getting killed by the South, right? I did a report. This is my first sort of, truther thing I did. And so I had to do a report on the Civil War when I was a kid. I went to the library, and I was often in the library. I like to read books about animals and things, right? I was like a naturalist type of kid. And still have a lot of interest in the animal kingdom. But I found a book, and it was like not a book a 7 or 8 year old should have been reading. Like I was young. And it talked about how the war was not a war against slavery. That Lincoln said racist things. Like he mocked interracial marriage and interracial relationships in South Carolina. Like he said things that were very racist. And he was clearly someone who didn't believe that black people were equal to white people, right? So he's celebrated as this guy, but it's not true. But I'm reading this book, and it talked about how it was an economic war. And I probably didn't even understand most of it, but I remember it, right? And I wrote this report. I think my teacher was probably like, what? But that's the book I found, and that's what I understood to be the truth, and now even more so. And so, she is an Abraham Lincoln, somebody who's remembered for his principles, but really didn't have them. He did the right thing because slavery was evil, but he didn't do it for the right reason, right? She didn't do the right thing, and she has no principles. But she's being remembered as a hero because she sacrificed something, but she was told to do this, right? She has no problem lying and deceiving and doing all the things her dad did.
By the people and for the people shall not perish from this earth. As we meet here tonight, that remains our greatest and most important task. Most of world history is a story of violent conflict, of servitude and suffering.
Your dad.
Most people in most places have not lived in freedom. Our American freedom is a providential departure from history. We are the exception. We have been given the
because we're stealing other people's resources to keep our country going, because we're an evil empire, and still we're not free. This is a ridiculous, just whatever.
Gift of freedom by God and our founding fathers.
Not by God. Not by God.
It has been said that
God has the least freedom of any being in the universe. God can only be God. God can only be divine. God can't make mistakes. Freedom is the ability to make mistakes. Freedom is the ability to choose against your nature, choose against your soul, choose against God's plan. There's infinite amount of wrong choices, only one right one. And God has to make that right choice all the time, right? And so, freedom, freedom's for the people who, it's a freedom to do wrong, right? There's only one right choice in any situation, and it's what your soul wants you to do. All the other choices are wrong choices. And so freedom means the ability to choose to do the wrong thing. And God gives you that, but that doesn't mean is endorsing your wrong choices.
The long arc of history bends toward justice and freedom. That's true, but only if we make it bend. Today, our highest duty is to bend the arc of history, to preserve our nation and its blessings, to ensure that freedom will not perish, to protect the very foundations of this constitutional republic.
Yeah, come on.
America has meant so much to so many because we are the best hope of freedom on earth. Last week in Laramie, a gentleman came up to me with tears in his eyes. I'm not an American, he said, but my children are. I grew up in Brazil. I know how fragile.
She's got Brazilian support. She's got support from Brazilians.
Freedom is, and we must not lose it here. A few days ago, here in Jackson, a woman told me that her grandparents had survived Auschwitz. They found refuge in America. She said she was afraid that she had nowhere to go if freedom died here. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom must not, cannot, and will not die here.
Die here. Freedoms are going to die here. Woo! Wyoming, woo!
We must be very clear-eyed about the threat we face and about what is required to defeat it. I have said since January 6th that I will do whatever it takes to ensure Donald Trump is never again anywhere near the Oval Office, and I mean it.
She means it. Woo! She's going to get Trump, woo!
This is a fight for all of us together. I'm a conservative Republican. I believe deeply in the principles and the ideals on which my party was founded. I love its history, and I love what our party has stood for. But I love my country more.
She loves her country more than her party. Woo! She's got so much love. Love for her party, love for her country. No love for Trump, but love for everything else.
So I ask you tonight to join me. As we leave here, let us resolve that we will stand together, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, against those who would destroy our republic.
I mean, her dad was just so evil, right? And everything he did. And like for her to just get up here and try to claim to be the moral authority, right?
They are angry and they are determined, but they have not seen anything like the power of Americans united in defense of our Constitution and committed to the cause of freedom.
Yeah, that's what you're saying the opposition to Trump is? When Joe Biden droned those kids, is that what you're saying? Or any of this stuff when they've embezzled millions of dollars of bailout money now and his crackhead son, right? Like, look at this Evan for this like lifeless, I mean, he's got this like robotic, heartless, and just trying to claim to be a hero.
There is no greater power on this earth, and with God's help, we will prevail. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless Wyoming. God
You ain't
bless
getting any help from God.
the United States of America. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
All right. Atone for your father's frickin' crimes and your crimes against humanity and people and families and all of it. Okay, so I had other things to get to, but I'll cover these, tomorrow. This video went kind of long. Only spirituality will save this world. It's power motto, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.